Our topic is on immigration, and first we're going to talk about in-class sources, then we're going to move on to scripture, and we're going to finish up with immigration in the media and in our country and other places in the world. Okay, so first of all, I want to go over a few of the sources that we talked about in class. Um, None of the sources really directly related to immigration, but a lot of the ideas can be taken and applied to the topic of immigration. And so, first of all, I just want to talk about exclusion and embrace. There was a lot of good stuff in here. And the general premise of Wolf's reasoning is how to live in a difficult and conflicting world. And of course, in a difficult and conflicting world, there is immigration. Immigration is one of the things that we deal with. And so I just wanted to lay out a few of the various circumstances that someone might want to immigrate so that you could have those in your mind as I continue and apply the reading to immigration. A few reasons that I added were desire toward a certain lifestyle, fleeing from an oppressor, which might include fleeing from danger and violence, and then political freedom, and finally, religious tolerance. So, how I think that Wolf would approach immigration from his standpoint, first of all, Wolf comes in focusing on the victim, and he thinks that the victim is the most important part of breaking the chain because the victim has the capability of forgiving and embracing someone. And so, in this particular perspective, an immigrant would see himself as the issue of some injustice or unattractive situation, and he seeks to change this. And so the immigrant in this situation is the victim. And so there are a few factors that were in exclusion and embrace that I think are important to consider when you're an immigrant. So, first, Wolf has the idea of the ability to balance distance and belonging. And distance is really the Christian side of it. That's the portion where somebody creates a boundary so that they can have distance in order to maintain their religion. And then, also, as Christians, we also need to belong in some sort of way, and that's our citizenship. And so, in order for us as Christians to have an impact on those around us, we also need to belong. And so, there's this balance of distance and belonging that we need in our society wherever we're going to be. Okay, the second idea that I drew from the reading is that God is global. Christianity is a universal community, and it's beyond heritage. And so, no matter where you are, you can adopt Christianity. And I think that this is a factor that needs to be taken into consideration when considering immigration. Between having distance and belonging, just remembering that God is everywhere, and we can create that distance for our religion. Finally, there's this idea of embrace, and this is a huge portion of the text. I really enjoyed reading about this part of the book, and ultimately, embrace to Wolf comes down to four different steps. There's repentance, forgiveness, space for the other, and forgetting. And these are awesome, but really, I want to talk about space for the other. And space for the other is a portion of embracing someone that requires you to understand the individual, see where they're coming from, see where they're different from you, and leave space for where they're different. See where they're coming from, really. And so I really liked this idea that Wolf also put in the book that there's a difference between freedom and embrace. And freedom is all about the individual, it's about your own rights. And then embrace is all about being individuals, but also being in communion at the same time. And the part that's unique about embrace, I think, is having that space for the other. That's what allows individuals to be in communion. That's what allows an environment to be forgiving and comfortable. And so I think that no matter where people go, it's important to try to instill embrace into whatever community it is that you're living in. And so, from Wolf's perspective, I think he expects us as Christians to approach whatever situations that we're in, whether we're in uncomfortable living situations currently or where we would be immigrating to, he expects us to embrace people on both of those sides. He expects us to understand that God is global and to have that in our worldview no matter where we're living. We have the same opportunity to be close to God, and then within that, the ability to distance ourselves wherever we are. That is essential to our faith. So, as Americans, we're living in a country that is very desirable for immigration, at least in regards to freedom. And the unfortunate part about this is that a very popular view in America right now is against immigration. And I think the main reason for this is the desire to avoid violence, to avoid different diseases, and ultimately to maintain prosperity in America. Prosperity is very high. The United States is a very rich and spoiled country. And ultimately, this comes down to America's vision of the good life, I think. And that's something that was touched on in Desiring the Kingdom. And that's something that as Christians, we need to make sure that we are looking at our political views and it comes down to ideas on immigration, really, for this presentation. We need to make sure that we are looking at them through an alien lens and that we are understanding the reasons and the desires behind our vision of the good life. And maybe our vision of the good life includes health and it includes safety. And we know that all immigrants aren't going to bring all of these things in. Most of them probably won't. But is this fear one of the things that holds us back? Is our own vision of the good life and our desires for ourselves, are they put above other human beings? That is a perspective on immigration that Desiring the Kingdom has really made me question some of the things that I've always thought about immigration. So finally, when it comes to immigration and coming back to Wolf, I think it's essential as Christians for us to have a theology of embrace. And while sometimes we might not want to give up parts of the good life to let whatever it might be in, perhaps immigration, it is our duty as Christians to love God's creatures. And so that is part of the theology of embrace, and that is something that we might have to put aside our own desires to do so. And then finally, I think it's necessary that we also have a theology of evangelism. Obviously, our country is not big enough to hold all of the people in the world in it. And so we cannot be opening our doors, just allowing everyone to file in, that wouldn't be a good world either. And so I think that it's important as Christians that we remember the importance of evangelism and reaching out to other countries and making those countries good places to be as well. Finally, I'd just like to touch on Desiring the Kingdom from an immigrant's perspective. And so I think that as a potential immigrant, I think it's important as a Christian to really assess where your desires are coming from. Why do you desire to immigrate to a certain place? What are the intentions here? Are they in line with the scripture? Or are they just a version of your own ideas of the good life? And so deciding in between your version of the good life and a Christian perspective on the good life, that is ultimate in making this decision. And then finally, once you have immigrated, making sure that things that are occurring in culture and in politics and in society surrounding you, you need to make sure that these things aren't just becoming your own. They're not just taking over you. That you are truly reassessing them often to make sure that you are making the right move when it comes to personal development and ways that this country might be developing you that you are not aware of.
Hey everybody, now that we have an understanding of what immigration is and different perspectives of it that we talked about previously, I think that we need to address how to apply scripture to this. I think this is a really huge concept that many of us do not address very often. So I'm taking it upon myself to represent my group for this. Many of us might know people who are from a different country that came here to the United States, and for others, they might be that person who fled their country, and they might be that person that this is this new world that they just jumped into. Personally, this topic means a lot to me because my dad is an immigrant that came from Italy when he was 16. He came here without any parents and only his siblings, and they had to figure out a transition into the United States. And he would always tell me how difficult it was and how he always felt scared and alone, which makes me really want to challenge myself and you to step up and rise to this issue that is surrounding us and that we're constantly facing, especially if we call ourselves Christians. Psalms 146:9 states that the Lord watches over the strangers. But this is just something I really wanted to point out because we are all strangers and we all have the Lord watching over us, that not only people that are immigrants are being watched over. I then want to continue to talk about that through our own experience of being in a place of uncomfort. There's this place of fear and worry that we're capable of understanding because we've all been there, and capable of now being the one that sheds love and compassion to others that are feeling that way. You might be wondering to yourself that you never left to another country and you can't even start to understand what they might be feeling like. And I agree, we can't. But what we can do is listen and remember the times that we felt alone in a place that was unfamiliar to us. And this place could be anywhere. This could be a childhood memory of switching schools and having to face that new environment. Or it could just be walking into church on Sunday alone. And remembering when people bring kindness and just smiled and addressed you, wanting to get to know you. And I think we need to take it upon ourselves to be that kindness into their world and just be by their side and just bring light into these moments that they're scared. We must remember that God places people that are immigrants in the same way. We must remember that God places people that, because it's that the people that God placed in our life in the same path as ours, so that we could be Christ-like in our actions and comfort those that we love, just like God loved us. In Matthew 25:31-46 states, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me." This supports my prior comment of how it's our responsibility to demonstrate the love to immigrants that we would have for God. I really love that throughout this class we learn that we must apply scripture to our life in a way of living it out by the change of our behaviors and habits, being aware of how we are treating others and ways to change it. So it's a really cool thought that our actions and our behaviors demonstrate God through it and sheds light on God. Next, I would like to address that many people always turn their heads when they're facing difficult topics and issues, and this one is about immigration, stating that it's not the problem or that they can't do anything to help it. But I believe that the way that we're told to demonstrate a change towards immigration can be supported by Luke 4:16-21. "Bring good news to the poor, release to the captives, sight to the blind, let oppression go free." These are things that we are capable of easily fulfilling by not putting ourselves first. It really challenges us to demonstrate these specific scriptures into habits to our life, so when we face issues like immigration, we will not look past it, thinking to ourselves that is not our issue, but instead be prepared to face these issues by rising to the moments and having scripture, just as Luke, to answer how we can solve these issues. In the passage, it states to release captives and let the oppression go, and in doing so, it's because we bring light and sight to the blind and to those that are choosing to look the other way. I think that this is a very strong piece of scripture that can be applied to support potential ways to face the topics of immigration in a Christ-like behavior. I would like to continue this slide with Ephesians 2:11 to 22. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are citizens with the saints and also members of the household of God. The reason why I picked this one was because of how it unites us together. We are no longer strangers, no longer defined by these boundaries that were human made, but instead we are all citizens and loved by God. What beauty is it in this scripture to see that God is capable of turning the ugliest situation into such a beautiful way to glorify His name. These visual images that I found were to demonstrate how immigration is an issue that we need to face by the works of our faith. The two that I posted demonstrate Jesus and how these people are made in the image of God, and we must recognize them as so, just like God would call us by our own name. The other two images on the other side was to demonstrate how our behavior should be towards each other. Love God, love others. Truly is capable of being applied to this issue, because the only way we could demonstrate a change is through love and our love in God. The image of a hand tree I thought would be a good visual aid of unity, of coming together as children of God.
Immigration in the media. Political news reporter from The Late Show, Stephen Colbert, talks about the current issues with allowing Syrians to immigrate to the U.S. from Syria. The circumstances in which the Syrians are fleeing are war, violence, and danger in their homeland. Stephen Colbert's purpose of his comical video is to poke fun at the negative views on immigration. The video becomes interesting when Colbert brings up the views of the Republican presidential candidates Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz.
Both Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush have suggested in recent days that America should accept Christian refugees from Syria, but not Muslims. Cruz explained by saying, quote, "There is no meaningful risk of Christians committing acts of terror."
That's right. No, that's right. Christians have never committed acts of terror. I'm sure these guys right here are just campers roasting marshmallows. You can tell they're campers because they're each wearing one-man tents. And this kind of selective immigration is nothing new. Like the plaque on the Statue of Liberty says, give us your tired, your poor, mostly Christians, maybe one or two Indian guys with engineering degrees.
Bush and Cruz attempt to take a more moderate side, allowing the Syrian refugees to immigrate to the U.S. by saying we will only let in those refugees which are Christian because non-Christians pose as terrorist threats to the U.S. Are the views of Bush and Cruz theological in nature? No. Do they think they are? Probably. If they were truly theological in nature, they would have no problem welcoming the refugees that need help in our country, because when you're a Christian, you aren't asked to be selective. You are asked to be Christ-like. Their theological reasoning behind their argument is flawed because they're picking and choosing the theological truths that they consider to be relevant. The Pope on immigration. Not only do politicians have views on immigration, but religious leaders do as well. Pope Francis stood before Congress discussing immigration and the recent flood of Syrian refugees to the United States. In his speech, he spoke candidly about immigration. He spoke about the past and how hard immigrating was and the lack of respect and love that immigrants were shown. He encouraged the people not to be fearful of foreigners because most of us were all once foreigners. He stressed that we are all descendants of immigrants and we must all use our heart and treat others with respect. He encourages that we do not repeat the sins and errors of the past, and he stresses justness and equality for those who immigrate here. He stresses for us not to turn our back on our neighbors or others around us. He encourages us to relate to others and reject hostility. He said something extremely important in his speech to Congress. He said, "We must not be shocked by the numbers, but pay attention to the people." And I think that that is so important when we're in this political cycle right now. We're shown a bunch of statistics and how we're overpopulated, and how many immigrants are existent in the United States today, and how they're the reason that our jobs are dwindling, and they're the reason that our economy is awful. But rather than looking at the numbers, if you really were to listen to each and every individual story and their history and look at their circumstances, it really does put those other issues at a lower and less relevant position. Pope Francis also mentions the golden rule given by Jesus on Sermon on the Mount. He says, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." This is just reiterating his respect that he calls from the people for people in need, and for immigrants or people that don't feel like they belong here, or basically anyone. I believe that this view of immigration is theologically sound. Pope Francis stands by his ideas, and he stands by ideas that are supported biblically, ethically, and morally. He infuses his message with using core values of the Christian faith and core values of the Bible. U.S. views on immigration. An article published in 2014 by the name of "Catholics, Other Christians Support Immigration Reform but Say Faith Plays a Small Role," focused on views that the U.S. people had when it came to immigration. They honed in on religious groups as well as different racial groups, and they asked them 3 questions. The first question that was asked was, which comes closer to your view about how to handle undocumented immigrants? The total from the amount surveyed was that 73% thought that they should be allowed to stay legally if they meet certain requirements, and 24% should not stay. Protestants, they thought that 69% should stay, 29% of Protestants thought they should not. White evangelicals reported 64% of them to stay and 34% to not. White mainline reported 65% of immigrants to stay with 32% to not. Black Protestants reported 76% would support allowing immigrants to stay, and 23% did not. When looking at the Catholic group, 77% of Catholics thought that they should be allowed to stay legally. 20% of Catholics did not. White non-Hispanic Catholics, 70% believed that they should stay, 28% did not. When looking at Hispanic Catholics, 91% believed that undocumented immigrants should be able to stay in the U.S., and only 6% of the Hispanic Catholics believed that they should not. What we see here is that, of course, you're going to have your minority races shift towards a more liberal view on immigration because it is more relevant to them or relevant to their culture or their families. You have Euro-Americans that may not feel that burden of having immigrant family members, or even being familiar with the fear that conservative immigration laws can play in their lives. The second question, looking at the second chart, is how important is it that the President and Congress pass significant immigration legislation this year? When looking at the total, 49% of everyone that they surveyed, that includes Protestant, Catholic, unaffiliated, and the different races, 49% thought that it was very important. 46% of Protestants, 42% of white evangelicals, 45% of white mainline, 46% of Black Protestant, 59% of Catholics, 49% of white non-Hispanic Catholics, and 73% of Hispanics, and 49% of unaffiliated. Again, we see that the Catholic and the Hispanic category, they do have a higher percentage in what they think is important when it comes to immigration. The third question that was looked at was the number of undocumented immigrants deported from the U.S. has increased in the past few years. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? So again, this depends on, all of these groups are religious and they have read the same Bible, and we're all Christians, Catholics, we're all brought up on the same philosophies as far as, how to treat one another and how to welcome each other in. And again, you see that for the Protestants, you have their 46% think it's a good thing that deportations have increased. White evangelicals, it's even more than just the Protestant group as a total. White evangelicals believe that 51% of them believe that it's a good thing. White mainline, 47%. Black Protestant, 40%. In the Catholics, they believe that 47% of them believe that it's a good thing. White non-Hispanics, 56% of them believe it's a good thing. And then when we get to our category of Hispanics, it's a dramatic drop from the numbers we've been seeing with the Hispanics. 34% of them believe that it is not a good thing compared to the other groups. So 34% think it's a good thing, but 59% of Hispanic Catholics believe that it is a bad thing and that it is detrimental. Reasons for this would be, deportations tear apart families, which is awful, and it could leave Hispanic families or other families that are considered immigrants to feel scared, and just that they really have no power in where they stay or where they go. Is this article founded on, theological views? Well, I'm pretty sure that the people in the survey did have theological views, but this article did find that just 7% of U.S. adults say that their religious beliefs were the influence regarding illegal immigration. It was far more common for people to say that personal experience, education, or what they read in the media influenced their thinking on this topic. So is the view of the people really theologically sound? I wouldn't say so, because they're not going back to their theological backgrounds. They're taking a place on immigration based on their own personal experience, or, what politician is siding with what. And I think that it's important that we really evaluate, what did Jesus actually want for us to do, and how is it to actually be Christ-like.
Thanks everyone for listening to our presentation on immigration. We hope that you learned a little bit and got a few new ideas about immigration from watching this presentation.